You are listening to Rudolf Steiner Audio.com. This is a reading of the Bamford translation, the most recent one, of a book by Rudolf Steiner entitled How to Know Higher Worlds, A Modern Path of Initiation. This is Chapter 9, entitled The Splitting of the Personality in Esoteric Training. Paragraph 1. In sleep, the human soul does not receive any information communicated by the physical senses. Perceptions from the ordinary outer world do not reach it. In fact, when we are asleep, our soul is in a sense outside that part of us, the so-called physical body, that mediates sense perceptions and thinking when we are awake. During this time, the soul is connected only with the subtler ether and astral bodies, both of which elude physical observation. These subtler bodies do not cease their activity in sleep. The soul lives in a higher world, just as the physical body lives among the things and beings of the physical world, where it is affected by them and works upon them. But the soul's life continues during sleep. Indeed, the soul is particularly active then. However, we can know nothing of our activity in this state until we possess the spiritual organs of perception necessary to observe, at least as well as our ordinary senses observe our physical surroundings in daily life, what goes on around us in sleep, and what we ourselves do there. As indicated above, esoteric training consists in the development of such spiritual organs of perception. Paragraph 2. If our sleep life has been transformed by means of esoteric training, along the lines described in the last chapter, then we can follow consciously all that goes on around us in that state. We can, at will, find our way in this new environment as easily as we can in our everyday waking life with our ordinary senses. We must bear in mind, however, that the perception of our ordinary sense-perceptible surroundings already requires a degree of clairvoyance. This was pointed out in the previous chapter. Still, at the beginning of our spiritual development, we perceive things belonging to another world without being able to connect them with our everyday material surroundings. Paragraph 3. These characteristics of sleep and dream life illustrate what is happening all the time in human beings. The soul lives and acts uninterruptedly in the higher worlds. From these worlds the soul draws the inspirations and impulses by means of which it works unendingly on the physical body. This higher life remains unconscious in most human beings. But as esoteric students, we bring these higher activities into consciousness. Thereby our lives are utterly changed. As long as our souls could not, in quotes, see in the higher sense, they were guided by superior cosmic beings. Now they have outgrown this guidance. Just as the operation that enables blind persons to see can change their lives so that they no longer need to be guided by others, so esoteric training likewise changes our lives. As esoteric students, we outgrow the need to be led. From now on, we must lead ourselves. As soon as this happens, of course, we become liable to errors, of which ordinary consciousness can have no inkling. We now act out of the world from which, unknown to us before, higher powers once influenced us. These higher powers are regulated by the universal harmony of the cosmos. On the path of inner training, we move out of this cosmic harmony. We must now do by ourselves what was previously done for us without our help or participation. Paragraph 4. For this reason, esoteric writings often have much to say of the dangers connected with the ascent to higher worlds. These descriptive warnings may easily instill a fear of the higher life in timid souls. Yet it must be said that such dangers exist only if we fail to follow the necessary precautions. As long as we follow fully the advice given by true esoteric training, our ascent to higher worlds will endanger neither life nor limb, even though it will take us through experiences whose power and greatness exceed anything that our wildest sense-bound imagination could conceive of. We encounter terrible powers that threaten life at every turn. We likewise learn to use certain forces and beings imperceptible to our physical senses. The great temptation will be to use these forces for our own selfish, forbidden ends, or to use them incorrectly out of an inadequate knowledge of the higher worlds. Some of these significant experiences, such as the encounter with, quote, the guardian of the threshold, close quote, will be discussed in later chapters. Nevertheless, whether we are aware of them or not, we must realize that forces hostile to life exist. True, their relationship to us is determined by higher powers, but this relationship naturally changes when we consciously enter into the world previously hidden from us. At the same time, however, our own being is enhanced, and our horizon of life experiences is expanded tremendously. Real danger exists, however, only when impatience and arrogance lead us to assume a certain premature autonomy in regard to our experiences in the higher worlds. When we cannot wait for sufficient insight into the supersensible laws to be given to us. Clearly, in this domain, humility and modesty are far less empty words than they are in ordinary life. But if these qualities have become second nature to us in the best sense, then we can be certain that our ascent to a higher life will be without danger to what we call our life and health. Above all, we must avoid any disharmony between our higher experiences and the events and demands of our everyday life. Our work is wholly here on earth. And if we evade our earthly tasks and try to escape into another world, we can rest assured that we will never achieve our goal. Yet what our senses perceive is only a part of this world. The beings who express themselves in the facts of the physical world are spiritual beings and inhabit the spiritual world. We must achieve and be blessed by the Spirit so that we can introduce its revelations into the sense-perceptible world. In other words, we must transform the earth by implanting in it what we discover of the spiritual realm. Our task is the transformation of the earth. Therein lies the only reason for seeking higher knowledge. The earth, as we know it with our senses, depends on the spiritual world, and this means that we can truly work on the earth only if we share in those worlds where creative forces are concealed. This realization should be our only motivation for wanting to ascend to higher worlds. If we enter esoteric training with this attitude and never deviate from the course it charts for us, we need fear no danger. The prospect of potential dangers on the path of esoteric training should not keep us from following it. It should merely exhort us to work diligently on developing the qualities that every true student of esoteric knowledge should possess. Paragraph 5. After these introductory comments, intended to dispel any fears, we shall now look more closely at some of these so-called, in quotes, dangers. Great changes definitely occur in the subtler, ether and astral bodies of a person who undertakes esoteric training. These changes are connected with certain evolutionary processes taking place in the three fundamental forces of the soul: willing, feeling, and thinking. Before our training, the relationship between these is determined by higher cosmic laws. Nothing about the way we think, feel, or will is arbitrary. Every idea that becomes conscious is connected by natural laws to a particular feeling or act of will. For instance, when we enter a stuffy room, we open the window, or when we hear our name called, we answer the call. Similarly, a foul smell evokes a feeling of disgust in us. These seemingly simple connections between thinking, feeling, and willing are the foundation upon which, if we survey it, we find that our whole life is built. We even consider the interconnectedness of these powers of thinking, feeling, and willing, based as they are on the laws of human nature, to be a prerequisite for a, in quotes, normal life. We would consider a person who took pleasure in foul odors or refused to answer questions as not normal, as violating the laws of human nature. We expect a good upbringing and appropriate instruction to have results because we assume that we can connect a child's feeling, willing, and thinking in a way that corresponds to human nature. Thus we teach children certain concepts on the assumption that these will later connect with their feelings and will. All such efforts are based on the underlying fact that the midpoints of thinking, feeling, and willing are connected in our finer soul bodies in a definite and lawful manner. This connection in the finer organism of the soul is reflected in the coarser physical body. Here, too, the connection between the organs of will and those of thinking and feeling is determined by laws. This is why a certain thought will regularly evoke a particular feeling or activity of will. In the course of higher development, however, the threads connecting these three basic powers are interrupted, severed. At first, this break occurs only in the subtler soul organism, but later, as we continue our ascent to higher knowledge, the separation also extends into the physical body. In fact, as one develops spiritually, the brain actually separates into three distinct members. Admittedly, this separation is not physically perceptible to the ordinary sense organs and cannot be proven with even the finest physical instruments. Nevertheless, it occurs. Clairvoyants can see that the brain of a person possessing advanced abilities separates into three independently active entities: a thinking brain, a feeling brain, and a willing brain. Close parenthesis. Paragraph 6. At this point in our spiritual evolution, the organs of thinking, feeling, and willing function separately, quite independently of one another. Their interconnection is thus no longer regulated by their own inherent laws, but by the individual's awakened higher consciousness. Therefore, one of the first changes we notice in ourselves as we advance in esoteric training is that neither ideas and feelings nor feelings and decisions are connected unless we ourselves create the connection between them. No impulse leads us from thought to action unless we ourselves freely create it. Consequently, we can now confront dispassionately events that before our training would have filled us with either burning love or bitter hatred. We can refrain from acting even in the presence of thoughts that would have spurred us automatically to action. Similarly, we can now act solely on the basis of pure will, even though others who have not undergone esoteric training cannot see the slightest reason for engaging in such actions. Thus, the great accomplishment bestowed upon us on this path is the attainment of complete mastery over the interaction of our thinking, feeling, and willing. But such complete mastery over our soul forces also means that we have complete and individual responsibility for them. Paragraph 7. Not until we have transformed our being in this way can we enter into a conscious relationship with certain supersensible beings and forces. For our soul forces of thinking, feeling, and willing are related to specific fundamental forces in the universe. For example, the force inherent in our will can affect certain things and beings of the higher world. It can also perceive them. But it can do so only once it has become free from its connection to feeling and thinking in our soul. As soon as this connection is undone, the activity of the will can be directed outward. The same is true of the powers of thinking and feeling. If someone sends a feeling of hatred toward me, a clairvoyant can see this as a delicate cloud of light of a certain hue, and can ward off this hatred, just as we would ward off a physical blow that is aimed at us. Hatred thus becomes a perceptible phenomenon in the supersensible world. But we can see it only when we are able to direct the force inherent in our feeling outward, much as we direct the receptivity of our eyes outward into the sense world. And not only hatred, of course. Other more significant facts of the material world are also perceptible in the higher world. And one can enter into a conscious relation with these by discovering and liberating the basic forces of the soul. Paragraph 8. Unless we follow the instructions of esoteric science closely, such a separation of thinking, feeling, and willing can easily lead us to deviate from the proper human path of development in 3 ways. Such a deviation occurs when the links connecting the 3 forces of the soul are destroyed before higher consciousness and its understanding are sufficiently advanced to be able to take the reins and lead the now separated forces in the right way to a free, harmonious working together. The achievement of higher consciousness is necessary, because as a rule the 3 forces do not develop equally in every phase of a person's life. In one person, thinking may be more developed than feeling and willing, while in another, feeling or willing may be predominant. As long as the connection between thinking, feeling, and willing remains regulated by the higher laws of the cosmos, however, such developmental discrepancies do not cause any disturbing irregularities in the higher sense. If will predominates in a person, for example, then the cosmic laws ensure that other forces counterbalance it and keep it from becoming excessive. But once we begin esoteric training, then the regulating influence of feeling and thinking on the will ceases, and the will, now no longer held in check, constantly impels us on to tremendous performances of power. If we reach this point before we have mastered higher consciousness and are able to create harmony between our forces, then our will can run rampant. It can overwhelm us, so that our feeling and thinking sink into complete powerlessness, and we become slaves, scourged by our will. As a result, we can become violent in character, rushing from one unbridled action to the next. We can also go astray if our feeling frees itself from the restraint of higher cosmic laws. A person inclined to revere others, for instance, can then become so completely dependent on them that he or she loses the will and ability to think. Instead of higher knowledge, such a person's lot is the most pitiful inner emptiness and impotence. If the natural tendency of our feelings is toward piety and religious exaltation, on the other hand, we can fall into raptures of religious self-gratification. A third evil arises when thinking predominates. This produces a contemplative nature, but one that is closed in upon itself and hostile to life. For a person of such a nature, the world has meaning only insofar as it provides objects to satisfy a boundless desire for wisdom. Thoughts no longer stir such a person to action or feelings. Instead, such people become indifferent and cold, avoiding contact with ordinary things as if they were nauseating, or at least had lost all meaning. Paragraph 9. Thus there are three ways in which we can go astray and deviate from the proper path of esoteric training. We can fall into willful violence, into sentimental luxuriating in feelings, or into a cold, loveless striving after wisdom. Viewed from the outside, by materialistic psychiatry, for instance, people who go astray in these ways do not seem very different, certainly not in degree, from those who are insane, or at least extremely neurotic, in quotes. Naturally, esoteric training should not lead to such a condition. The important thing is to ensure that thinking, feeling, and willing, the three fundamental forces of the soul, have developed harmoniously before they are freed from the connection implanted in them and become subject to the awakened higher consciousness. If any mistake is made in this development, and one of the three basic human forces loses its restraint, then the higher soul's birth into existence will be a miscarriage. When this happens, unrestrained force completely floods our whole personality, and it will be a long time before balance can begin to be restored. Thus, what seems a harmless aspect of our character before we enter esoteric training, such as whether we are predominantly thinking, feeling, or willing types, is so intensified once we become students that it can overpower the universal human element so necessary for life. This only becomes a real danger, however, once we are able to have conscious higher experiences in sleep consciousness as well as in the waking state. As long as our experience of sleep remains at the level of the mere awareness of the intervals in it, our sensory life, regulated by universal cosmic laws, has a compensatory effect on our soul when we are awake, restoring the soul's balance. Hence, it is critically important that our waking life be normal and healthy in all respects. The more fully we can respond to the demands that the outer world places on a healthy, vigorous constitution of body, soul, and spirit, the better. On the other hand, an overly exciting or exhausting daily life can be harmful, because we then add potentially destructive and hindering influences to the great transformations taking place in our inner life. We should deliberately seek out situations for which our strength is adequate and that can bring peace and harmony into our relationship with our surroundings. And we should avoid everything that might disturb this harmony and bring anxiety and turmoil into our lives. Here it is not so much a matter of getting rid of anxiety and turmoil in an outer sense, as of taking care that our moods, intentions, and thoughts, as well as our physical health, remain stable and do not constantly fluctuate. All this is not as easy for us after we have begun esoteric training as it was before. The higher experiences that now play into our lives continuously affect our whole existence. If anything is out of order in these higher experiences, then this irregularity lies in wait everywhere and can potentially throw us off at every turn. Therefore, we must do all we can to ensure complete self-mastery. We should never lack presence of mind or fail to survey calmly all situations under our consideration. In fact, any true esoteric schooling itself develops all these qualities in us. In the course of such training, we learn of the dangers and at the same time, and at the right moment, discover all the power we need to eliminate them from the field. The end of chapter 9. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. This is a reading of the Bamford translation, the newest one, of the book by Rudolf Steiner entitled How to Know Higher Worlds, A Modern Path of Initiation. This is chapter 10, The Guardian of the Threshold. Paragraph 1. Among the most important experiences in the ascent to higher worlds are the encounters with the so-called guardian of the threshold. Actually, there are two such beings, not one. They are known as the lesser and the greater guardians. We meet the first when the connection between willing, thinking, and feeling in the finer astral and ether bodies begins to loosen. This was described in the previous chapter. The second, greater guardian, is encountered when the separation of these three forces also affects the physical body, particularly the brain. Paragraph 2. The lesser guardian of the threshold is an independent being who does not exist for us until we have reached the appropriate level of inner development. Within the framework of this book, therefore, only a brief description of this guardian's essential characteristics may be given. Paragraph 3. First, an attempt will be made to give a narrative description of the meeting with this guardian. It is only through this meeting, in fact, that we become aware that the implanted connection between thinking and feeling and willing has been undone. Paragraph 4. A thoroughly horrid, ghostly being stands before us. Hence, we shall need full presence of mind and complete confidence in the safety and reliability of our cognitive path, which we have had ample opportunity to acquire in the course of our training, for this encounter. Paragraph 5. The guardian, then, reveals the meaning of this moment in words, somewhat as follows. Up to now, unseen by you, mighty powers presided over you. Through all the previous courses of your lives, they brought it about that every good deed was followed by its reward, and every evil action was followed by its grievous consequences. Through their influence, your character was formed out of your life experiences and thoughts. They were the agents of your destiny. They determined, on the basis of your conduct in previous lives, the measure of joy and pain allotted to you in each of your incarnations. They ruled over you in the form of the all-embracing law of karma. These powers will now begin to loosen the reins by which they guide you. Now, you yourself must do some of the work they did for you before. Up to now you endured many heavy blows of fate. You did not know why. Each was the consequence of a damaging deed done in a previous life. You found joy and happiness, and took these as you found them. These too were the result of earlier actions. You have many beautiful sides to your character, and many ugly flaws. You yourself produced these through your past experiences and thoughts. Up to now, you were unaware of this. Only the effects were known to you. But the karmic powers witnessed all your former actions, and even your most secret thoughts and feelings. And on that basis they determined who you are now, and how you live in your present incarnation. Paragraph 6 continuing. Now, however, all the good and bad aspects of your past lives are to be revealed to you. You will see them for yourself. They have been interwoven with your being all along. They were in you, and you could not see them, just as you cannot see your brain with your eyes. Now, however, your past actions are separating themselves from you, stepping out of your personality. They are assuming an independent form, one that you can see as you can see the stones and plants of the outside world. I am that self-same being, who made a body for itself out of your good and your wicked deeds. My ghostly form is spun, so to speak, from the account book of your life. Up to now, you have carried me invisibly within you. It was for your sake that this was so. It meant that the hidden wisdom of your destiny continued to work within you to eliminate the ugly spots in my appearance. Now that I have come forth from you, this hidden wisdom has also left you and will take care of you no longer. Instead, it puts the work into your own hands. I, myself, if I am not to fall into corruption, must become a perfect and glorious being. For were I to fall, I would drag you down with me into a dark, corrupted world. To prevent this, your own wisdom must be great enough to take over the task previously performed by the hidden wisdom now departed from you. I shall never leave your side once you have crossed my threshold. I shall always be there beside you in a form you can perceive. From then on, whenever you think or act wrongly, you will immediately see your fault as an ugly demonic distortion in my appearance. My being will be changed and become radiantly beautiful only when you have made amends for all your wrongs and have so purified yourself that you become incapable of further evil. Then, too, I shall be able to unite with you again as a single being in order to bless and benefit your further activity. Paragraph 7 continue. My threshold is built of every feeling of fear still within you, and every feeling of reluctance in the face of the strength you need to take on full responsibility for your thoughts and actions. As long as you still harbor any trace of fear directing your own destiny, the threshold lacks an essential element. As long as a single stone is missing, you will remain on this threshold as if spellbound, or stumble. Therefore, do not try to cross this threshold until you are completely free of fear and feel yourself ready for the highest responsibility. Paragraph 8 continue. Until now, I have left you only when death called you from an earthly life. But even then, my form was veiled from your eyes. Only the powers of destiny, presiding over you, could see me. during the interval between death and rebirth, based on my appearance, they formed in you the forces and faculties to enable you to work to make me beautiful in your next life, and so ensure the well-being of your progress. Thus, it was I and my imperfections that made the powers of destiny send you back to a new earthly incarnation. When you died, I was there. It was for my sake that the rulers of karma decided that you must reincarnate. If, without knowing it, you were to transform and perfect me through life forever renewed in this way, then you could avoid falling into the powers of death. But then you would have become completely one with me, and, united, we would pass into immortality. Paragraph 9, continue. So now I stand visible before you, as I have always stood invisible beside you in the hour of your death. Once you have crossed my threshold, you will enter realms you otherwise entered only after physical death. Now you will enter them in full knowledge. From now on, though living outwardly and visibly upon the earth, you will live at the same time in the realm of death, that is, in the realm of eternal life. Indeed, I am your angel of death, but at the same time, I also bring you never-ending higher life. While still living in the body, you will die through me and experience rebirth into indestructible existence. Paragraph 10, continue. In the realm you are henceforth entering, you will meet beings of a supersensible kind. Bliss will be your share in this realm. Yet I, who am your own creation, must be your first acquaintance in this world. Earlier I lived on your life, but now through you I have awakened to an independent existence of my own and stand before you as the visible standard of your future actions, and perhaps also as a constant reproach. You have been able to create me, and in so doing have taken on the duty of transforming me. Paragraph 11. What is indicated here in narrative form must not be understood only symbolically. It is, on the contrary, in the highest degree an absolutely real experience, which any student pursuing esoteric training to the appropriate level can have. Footnote: as is clear from the above explanations, the guardian of the threshold described here is an astral appearance that reveals itself to our newly awakened higher perception. Spiritual science guides us to this supersensible encounter. To make this guardian physically visible is an act of low magic based on the creation of a cloud of fine substance, a vapor mixture of several substances in a certain proportion. The developed forces of the magician can then give this vapor form and shape and animate it with our still unredeemed karma. However, if we have sufficiently prepared ourselves for higher perception, we no longer need such sense-perceptible props. On the other hand, if we confront our unredeemed karma without adequate preparation, we risk going badly astray. Thus we should not seek this encounter until we are really ready. Bulwer-Lytton's novel Zanoni contains a fictional representation of this guardian of the threshold. End of footnote. Paragraph 12. The guardian's function is to warn us not to go any further unless we feel strong enough to meet the challenges contained in the words addressed to us. horrid as it may be, the guardian's appearance is, after all, but the consequence of our own past lives. It is only our own character, awakened to an independent life outside of us. This awakening of our character to an independent existence occurs as our thinking, feeling, and willing begin to separate. It is already a deeply meaningful experience to feel for the first time that we have given birth to a spiritual being. The whole purpose of our preparation, our esoteric training, is to enable us to bear the awful sight of this guardian without any trace of fear or aversion. When we meet the guardian, we must feel our strength so grown that we can take upon ourselves the task of the guardian's transformation and enhancement in full knowledge and consciousness. Paragraph 13. As a result of passing the meeting with the guardian of the threshold successfully, our next physical death is a quite different event than before. Dying becomes a conscious experience for us, in which we lay aside our physical body, like a garment that is worn out or so torn that it is no longer usable. In a sense, our physical death will then upset only those close to us, whose outlook and perceptions are still limited to the material world. In their eyes we, in quotes, die, but nothing important changes for us in our surroundings. For before we die, the whole supersensible world that we enter with death is already open to us, and after dying it remains open to us as before. The guardian of the threshold is also connected with something else. Each of us belongs to a family, a people, a race. Our activity in this world depends upon our belonging to such a unit. Even our individual personality is related to it. In fact, our membership in a family, a nation, or a race affects not only our conscious activities, for every family, nation, and race has its own destiny, just as each has its own particular character. As long as our perspective is limited to the material world, however, such realities remain merely general concepts. Materialistically biased thinkers regard with contempt any esoteric scientist who attributes family or national characteristics and lineal or racial destinies to beings whom they consider just as real as the individuality to whom they attribute personality and destiny. Yet such esoteric scientists have come to know worlds of which our individual personalities are parts, just as our arms, legs, and head are parts of our body. The life of families, nations, and races is affected thus not only by the individuals who belong to them, but also by, in quotes, family souls, nation souls, and race spirits. These are real beings. In a sense, as individuals, we are only the instruments, the executive organs, so to speak, of these family souls and race spirits. Indeed, we may say, for example, that the soul of a nation or people makes use of the individuals who belong to it to accomplish certain tasks. This folk soul does not descend to the sense-perceptible world. It remains in the higher realms. To work in the physical world, the folk soul of a nation makes use of individual human beings as physical organs. This process is analogous on a higher level to a civil engineer in the material world making use of construction workers to execute the details of a project. In the truest sense, we each receive our allotted human task from our family, nation, or race soul. As long as our experience is limited to the sense-perceptible world, we are not initiated into the higher purpose of which this task is a part, but work unconsciously toward the goals of our group souls. As soon as we encounter the guardian of the threshold, however, we not only know our own personal tasks, but also have to work consciously to help accomplish those of our people and our race. Thus, each expansion of our horizon also extends the sphere of our responsibility. The actual process underlying this revelation at the threshold is the adding of a new body to our subtler body. This is much like putting on a new garment. Previously, we moved through the world clothed only in the sheaths that envelop our personality. Higher spirits, making use of our personality, oversaw what we had to do for our community, our nation, and our race. Now, however, the guardian of the threshold reveals to us that these spirits will no longer take care of us. From now on, they withdraw their guiding hands. We must therefore leave behind all belonging to communities. Yet, as isolated individuals, we would wholly harden within ourselves and fall into ruin if we did not acquire the powers inherent in the spirits of our race and nation. While many people certainly believe they have freed themselves fully from all tribal and racial connections and are simply human and nothing else, we have to wonder what made this freedom possible for them. After all, were they not given their place in the world by their family? And have not their lineage, nation, and race made them what they are? Their lineage, nation, and race have taught and educated them. They owe their ability to transcend tribal and racial prejudices to this education. Lineage, nation, and race have enabled them to become the light bearers and benefactors of their tribe or even their race. Thus, even though these people claim to be no more than simply human, they owe the ability to make such claims to the spirits of their communities. In fact, only when we follow the path to inner knowledge will we experience what it really means to have left behind all tribal, national, and racial connections and to be abandoned by the spirits of nation, tribe, and race. Indeed, it is on the esoteric path that we first experience for ourselves the meaninglessness of the education for the life we are now entering that all these connections have given us. For as soon as the threads joining willing, thinking, and feeling begin to snap, all that has been instilled in us completely dissolves. We then look back upon the results of our previous upbringing as if we were watching our house crumble into individual bricks that we must then rebuild in a new form. It is much more than a mere figure of speech when we are told that after the guardian begins to speak, a whirlwind arises from the place where the guardian stands, extinguishing all the spiritual lights that illuminated our life up to now. Utter darkness then surrounds us, broken only by the radiance streaming from the guardian. Out of this darkness we hear the guardian exhorting us, "Do not cross my threshold until you fully understand that you yourself have to illuminate the darkness before you. Do not take a single step forward until you are absolutely sure that you have enough fuel in your own lamp, because the lamps of those who have guided you up to now will no longer be there in the future." Following these words, we must turn and cast our gaze behind us. The guardian of the threshold now pulls aside the curtain that hitherto veiled life's deep mysteries from us. Now the spirits of tribe, nation, and race are revealed in their full reality. We see clearly how we have been guided in the past, and that now this guidance is no more. This is the second warning we receive at the threshold from its guardian. Paragraph 14. No one could bear the sight described here without preparation. The higher training that enables us to reach the threshold helps us at the same time to find the necessary strength when we need it. In fact, our training can proceed so harmoniously that when we enter this new life, we do so without drama or tumult. Our experiences at the threshold are then accompanied by a premonition of that bliss which will be the keynote of our newly awakened life. The sensation of our new freedom outweighs all other feelings. And in the light of this sensation, our new duties and responsibilities seem natural and inevitable at our given stage of life. The end of chapter 10. You are listening to Rudolf Steiner Audio.com. This is a reading of the newest Bamford translation of Rudolf Steiner's book, How to Know Higher Worlds, A Modern Path of Initiation. This is chapter 11, entitled Life and Death, the Great Guardian of the Threshold. Paragraph 1. The previous chapter showed that the significance of the encounter with the so-called lesser guardian of the threshold lies in the fact that in this meeting we perceive a supersensible being that we ourselves have, to some extent, created. For the body of this being is made up of the results, previously invisible to us, of our own actions, feelings, and thoughts. Unbeknownst to us, these invisible powers became the causes of our destiny and personality. And from this moment on, we realize how we ourselves laid the foundations of our present life in the past. In this way, our own being begins to become transparent to us. For example, certain tendencies and habits dwell within us. Now we realize why we have these. We have met with certain strokes of fate. Now we recognize where these come from. We understand why we love some things and hate others, why some things make us happy and others cause us unhappiness. That is, we come to understand our visible life on the basis of its invisible causes. Even the essential facts of life, such as illness and health, birth and death, are unveiled before our sight. We realize that we wove the causes that led us to return to life before we were born. We come to know, too, the being within us that is created but unfinished in this visible world, the being that can be finished and perfected only in this same visible, perceptible world. For the opportunity to work on the completion of this being does not exist in any world other than this. Thus we recognize that death cannot permanently separate us from this world. Inwardly we realize, quote, "Once I entered this world for the first time, because I am a being who needs life in this world in order to acquire qualities I cannot acquire in any other world. And I must remain connected to this world until I have developed everything within me that can be found there. One day, because I have acquired all the faculties I need in this sense-perceptible, visible world, I shall become a useful co-worker in another world." Close quote. In other words, one of the most important experiences we gain from initiation is that we learn to know and to treasure the true value of the visible, sense-perceptible world better than we could before our esoteric training. Indeed, only through insight into the supersensible worlds do we realize the value of the sense-perceptible world. A person who has not experienced this insight, and thus perhaps believes that the supersensible regions are of infinite, incomparable worth, may underestimate the sense-perceptible world. But Those who have had insight into the supersensible know that without their experiences in the visible world, they would be quite powerless in the invisible worlds. To live in the invisible worlds, we must have the tools and faculties appropriate to them. We can develop these only in the visible world. For example, if we are to become aware of the invisible worlds, we must learn to see spiritually. This power of spiritual vision in a higher world develops only gradually by means of experiences in the lower world. A person can just as little be born with spiritual eyes in a spiritual world if he or she has not previously developed these eyes in the sensible world, as a child could be born with physical eyes if these had not been developed in the mother's body. Paragraph 2. We can now understand why the threshold to the supersensible world is protected by a guardian. For under no circumstances could we be allowed a true insight into these realms if we had not first developed the necessary faculties. And this is the reason why, if we have not yet developed the ability to work in other worlds, a veil is drawn across our experiences when we die and enter these realms. That is, we may not behold the supersensible worlds until we are ready and mature enough to do so. Paragraph 3. When we enter the supersensible worlds, life takes on a completely new meaning for us. We see that the sensible world is the fertile soil, the living medium or substratum of a higher world. Indeed, in a certain sense, this higher world seems incomplete without the lower one. Two vistas then open up before us, one into the past, the other into the future. We see into a past in which this physical, sensible world did not yet exist. The prejudice that the supersensible spiritual world developed out of the sensible material world lies far behind us now. We know that the supersensible world came first, and that the sensible physical world developed out of it. We see that before we entered the physical world for the first time, we ourselves belonged to a supersensible world, and that this supersensible world too had to pass through life in the sensible world in order to develop further. Its further evolution was impossible unless it passed through the physical realm. Indeed, only if certain beings evolved with the appropriate faculties in the physical realm could the supersensible realm advance in its evolution. We are those beings. Human beings, as we are today, arise at a level of spiritual existence that is incomplete, imperfect. Within this level, we are in the process of being led to a stage of completion that will enable us to continue our work in the higher world. At this point, our vision turns toward the future, revealing a higher level of the supersensible world. Here we find fruits first formed in the sense-perceptible physical world. The sense world we know today will have been overcome by then, but its results will have been incorporated into a higher world. Paragraph 4. We can now begin to understand the meaning of illness and death in the physical world. Death, after all, merely expresses the fact that the supersensible world had previously reached a point beyond which it could not advance by its own efforts. Universal death would have overtaken it if it had not received a new life impulse. This new life has become a struggle against universal death. Out of the ruins of a withering, inwardly solidifying world, the buds of a new world blossomed. That is why our world contains both death and life, and why things are gradually intermingling. The dying parts of the old world still cling to the seeds of the new life developing out of them. We can see this most clearly expressed in ourselves. The sheath we bear has been preserved from the old world, but the seed of the being that will live in the future is already growing within it. Hence, as human beings, we have a double nature, mortal and immortal. Our mortal being is in its final stages. Our immortal being is only beginning. But only within the twofold world, mortal and immortal, whose expression is the sense-perceptible physical world, can we acquire the faculties that will lead the world to immortality. Our task is to harvest from the mortal world fruits for the immortal. When we contemplate our being, which we ourselves have built up in the past, we must say to ourselves, quote, "We bear within ourselves the elements of a dying world. These elements work within us, yet gradually, with the help of the new immortal elements awakening within us, we are able to break their power." Close quote. In this way our path takes us from death to life. Indeed, if we are conscious in the hour of our death, we would realize, quote, "The dying world was our teacher. The fact that we die is a result of all the past with which we are interwoven. But the field of mortality has prepared seeds of immortality for us. We carry these with us into another world. If everything depended only on the past, we would never have been born. The past, its life, ends with birth. Life in the sensible world is wrested from universal death by the new seed of life. The time between birth and death is simply an expression of how much the new life can wring from the dying past. And illness is but the consequence of the part of this past that is dying." Close quote. Paragraph 5. Here we find an answer to the question, quote, "Why must we work our way only gradually from error and imperfection to truth and goodness?" Close quote. Our actions, feelings, and thoughts begin under the rulership of what passes and dies away. Out of what passes away, our perceptible physical organs evolve and are fashioned. As a result, these organs and all that stimulates them are doomed to perish and die away. We will not, therefore, find anything immortal in our instincts, drives, and passions, nor in the organs belonging to them. We will find immortality only in what appears as their product, in the work done by these organs. Only when we have drawn out of this perishable world all that there is to be drawn out of it, will we be able to cast aside the foundation we have outgrown, which manifests itself in the physical, sensible world. Paragraph 6. Thus, the first guardian of the threshold replicates our dual nature as human beings, consisting of mixed mortal and immortal elements. And thereby this guardian clearly reveals to us what still needs to be done to attain the sublime light form capable of dwelling again in the world of pure spirit. Paragraph 7. The first guardian makes graphically clear how entangled we are with the physical, sensible world. This entanglement is expressed, first of all, by the presence of instincts, drives, passions, egotistic desires, and all forms of self-interest. It manifests, too, in our belonging to a race, a nation, and so forth. Peoples and races are, after all, merely different developmental stages in our evolution toward a pure humanity. The more perfectly that individual members of a race or people express the pure ideal human type, the more they have worked their way through from the physical and mortal to the supersensible and immortal realm, the, in quotes, higher this race or nation is. Human evolution, through repeated incarnations in ever higher nations and races, is thus a process of liberation. In the end, we must all appear in harmonious perfection. We perfect ourselves, likewise, as we pass through ever purer moral and religious convictions. For every stage of moral development still harbors some yearning for what is perishable, as well as idealistic seeds of the future. Paragraph 8. What the lesser guardian of the threshold shows us are only the results of time that has passed. The seeds of the future are present only to the extent that they have been woven into the guardian in the past. But human beings are called upon to bring with them into the future supersensible world all that they can gain from the material world. Were we to bring with us only what was woven into our image from the past, we would accomplish only a part of our earthly task. That is why, after a certain period of time, the lesser guardian of the threshold is joined by a greater guardian. What takes place in the form of this meeting with the second greater guardian will once again be described in narrative form. Paragraph 9. After we have recognized in the lesser guardian those things from which we need to free ourselves, a magnificent form of light comes to meet us on the path. The beauty of this form is difficult to describe in ordinary language. The meeting takes place when our physical organs of thinking, feeling, and willing have so separated from each other, and even from the physical body, that they themselves no longer regulate their mutual interaction. Instead, higher consciousness, now detached completely from physical conditions, regulates their relations. As a result, our organs of thinking, feeling, and willing have become instruments under the control of the soul, which exercises its rulership from the supersensible realms. The soul, freed in this way from all sensory bonds, now encounters the second guardian of the threshold, who speaks somewhat as follows. Paragraph 10. You have freed yourself from the world of the senses. You have earned the right of citizenship in the supersensible world. From now on, you may work from there. For yourself, you no longer need your physical bodily nature in its present form. If all you wanted was to acquire the capacity to dwell in the supersensible world, you would never need to return to the world of the senses. Look at me. See how immeasurably I am raised above all that you have already made of yourself up to now. You have reached your present stage of completion by means of faculties that you were able to develop in the sense world while you were still dependent upon it. Now you are entering a time when the powers you liberated must continue to work upon this sense world. Until now you have worked only to free yourself, but now that you are free, you can help free all your fellow beings in the sense world. Up to now you have striven as an individual. Now you must join yourself to the whole, so that you may bring with you into the supersensible realm not only yourself, but also all else that exists in the sensible world. Some day you will be able to unite with my form, but I myself cannot find perfect blessedness as long as there are others who are still unfortunate. As a single liberated individual, you could enter the realm of the supersensible today. but then you would have to look down upon those sentient beings who are not yet freed. You would have separated your destiny from theirs, but you are linked together with all sentient beings. All of you had to descend into the world of the senses to draw from it the powers required for a higher world. Were you to separate yourself from your fellow beings, you would misuse the powers you are able to develop only in consort with them. If they had not descended into the sense world, you would not have been able to descend either. Without them, you would lack the powers you need for supersensible existence. You must share with the others the powers that you achieved with them. Therefore, I refuse to admit you to the highest regions of the supersensible world until you have used all your powers for the deliverance of your fellow world and fellow beings. What you have already achieved entitles you to dwell in the lower regions of the supersensible world, but I will stand at the doorway to the higher regions like the cherubim with the flaming sword before the gates of paradise. I will deny you entry as long as you still have powers that you have not put to use in the sense world. If you do not use your own powers, others will come who will put them to use. Then a high supersensible world will incorporate all the fruit of the sensible realm. But the ground you stand on will be pulled out from under your feet. The purified world will develop over and beyond you. You will be excluded from it. If this is your choice, then yours is the black path. But those from whom you separate yourself tread the white path. Paragraph 11. In this way, the great guardian of the threshold announces his presence soon after the meeting with the first guardian. Initiates now know precisely what awaits those who yield to the temptations of a premature stay in the supersensible realms. The second guardian of the threshold emits an indescribable radiance. Union with this guardian is a distant goal for the beholding soul. Yet the certainty is also present that such a union is possible only after all the powers that have flowed into us from this world have been expended in the service of liberating and redeeming it. Should we, therefore, decide to meet the demands of this higher being of light, we will be able to contribute to the liberating of the human race. We will then offer up our gifts and talents on the sacrificial altar of humanity. But if we prefer our own premature ascent into the supersensible world, then the stream of humanity will pass over and beyond us. Once we have liberated ourselves, we can no longer win any new powers for ourselves from the world of the senses. If, therefore, we still place our work at the disposal of the sense world, we do so knowing that we are thereby renouncing any gain for ourselves from the place of our future effort. But even when the choices are presented so clearly, it cannot be said that taking the white path is a matter of course. What we choose, after all, depends on whether we have sufficiently purified ourselves of all traces of selfishness, so that at the time of making the decision, the allure of personal salvation and blessedness no longer tempts us. This temptation of personal salvation on the black path is the greatest we can conceive of. The white path, on the other hand, does not seem tempting at all. It does not appeal to our egotism. What we receive in the higher regions of the supersensible realms when we take the white path is not something for ourselves, but only something that flows from us, namely, love for the world and our fellow beings around us. But on the black path, nothing that our egotism desires is denied us. On the contrary, the fruit of this path is precisely the complete satisfaction of egotism. Thus, those seeking salvation only for themselves will almost certainly choose the black path. In their case, indeed, it is appropriate. Clearly, therefore, we must not expect occultists on the white path to provide any instructions for the development of our egotistic capital I. They have no interest whatsoever in the bliss and salvation of the individual. As far as a white occultist is concerned, each one of us must attain such salvation for ourselves. It is not their task to accelerate this process. What matters to them is the evolution and liberation of all beings, human beings and their fellow beings. Therefore, their task is only to indicate how we can train our powers for collaboration in this work. Thus, they place selfless dedication and the willingness to sacrifice above all other virtues. Nevertheless, they reject no one outright, for even the most egotistic can purify themselves. All the same, those seeking only for themselves, as long as they do so, will get nothing from such occultists. Even though true occultists will never refuse to help a seeker, such seekers may well deprive themselves of the fruit of their helping guidance. Therefore, if we truly follow the instructions of a good esoteric teacher, we will understand the demand that the second guardian makes after we have crossed the threshold. Indeed, if we fail to follow such a teacher's instructions, we cannot expect ever to reach the threshold at all. The instructions of true esoteric teachers lead to the good, or they lead to nothing. To guide us to egotistic salvation and mere existence in a supersensible world is not their task. On the contrary, their task, from the start, is to keep us at a distance from the supra-earthly world until we can enter it with a will dedicated to full and selfless collaboration. The end of chapter 11. You are listening to Rudolf Steiner Audio.com. This is a reading of the newest Bamford translation of the book by Rudolf Steiner entitled How to Know Higher Worlds, A Modern Path of Initiation. This is section 12, not a chapter, let's say, but an epilogue written by Dr. Steiner in 1918. The path to supersensible cognition, indicated in this book, leads to a soul experience. It is particularly important that anyone aspiring to this level of experience harbor no illusions or misunderstanding regarding this experience. Certainly, it is easy to deceive ourselves about these things. One of the gravest deceptions occurs when the entire realm of soul experiences spoken of in spiritual science is misclassified so that it appears placed in the same category with superstition, visionary dreams, mediumism, and other aberrations of the natural human striving for the spirit. This error occurs most often when students following the path presented here are confused with others who, in their attempt to find a way into supersensible reality, deviate from authentic cognitive striving, and so decline into the aberrations mentioned above. If we follow the path presented here, our soul experiences take place within the realm of pure soul spiritual experience. In order to have such experiences, we must first make ourselves as inwardly free and independent of physical life as we are in ordinary consciousness when we form thoughts about the perceptual world or our inner wishes, feelings, and intentions, thoughts that are independent of and unattributable to the actual experience of perceiving or feeling or willing. Some people, of course, deny the existence of such thoughts. They claim that we cannot think anything that is not drawn from perception or from inner life, as this is conditioned by the body. Therefore, they say all thoughts are simply shadow images of perceptions or inner experiences. Those who assert this, however, only do so because they themselves have never been able to develop in their souls the faculty of experiencing the pure, self-sufficient life of thought. Once we have experienced this, and it is a living experience for us, we know that whenever thinking presides in our soul life, we are engaged to the extent that such thinking permeates our other soul functions in an inner activity in whose creation the body plays no part. In our ordinary soul lives, thinking is almost always mixed with other activities, such as perceiving, feeling, willing, and so on. These other activities originate in the body, but thinking plays into them. And to the extent that it plays into them, something occurs in and through us in which the body has no part. Those who deny this cannot rise above the illusion caused by the fact that thinking is always observed together with these other activities. With inner effort, however, we can experience in our souls the thinking part of our inner life in itself, apart from all the other activities of our inner life. That is, we can isolate something consisting only of pure thoughts from everything else in our soul life. These thoughts are self-sustaining and free of any admixture of other activities. They have been cleansed of everything resulting from the perception of the outer world, bodily functions, or the inner life they govern. By their very nature, in and of themselves, such thoughts show themselves to be spiritual, supersensible entities. If our soul unites with these thoughts and excludes all perception, remembering, and other inner activities, it lives with this thinking in the supersensible realm. That is, it experiences itself outside the body. Once this is understood, it can no longer be doubted that the soul can have supersensible experiences outside the body, for this would mean denying what we know from first-hand experience. Why, we may wonder, are people reluctant to accept this confirmed fact? The reason is that it does not reveal itself unless we have first put ourselves in the soul state capable of receiving it. People, however, are generally suspicious if they are required to make an effort of a purely soul nature for something to be revealed to them that in itself is independent of them. They believe that because they have to prepare themselves for its revelation, they have actually produced its content by themselves. In other words, for the most part, people prefer to have passive experiences that require no effort on their part. If, in addition, they are also unfamiliar with the most basic requirements for a scientific understanding of a set of facts, they will easily take the contents or products of a soul in a state of lowered consciousness, that is, a state below the degree of conscious activity displayed in sensory perception and voluntary action, as an objective revelation of a non-material world. In other words, they will mistake visionary experiences, mediumistic revelations, and similar soul contents for true spiritual perception. What is experienced in such states of lowered consciousness, however, is not a supersensible, but a subsensible world. Not all conscious waking life runs its course wholly within the body. In particular, what is most conscious in waking life takes place on the boundary between the body and the outer physical world. Hence, what happens in our sense organs during perception is as much the projection into the body of an event occurring outside as it is a permeation of this outer event by and from the body. Likewise, our will life is based upon the fact that human nature is embedded in the cosmic whole, so that what happens in us through our will is also simultaneously a part of the whole cosmic process. These soul experiences that occur at the boundary of the body certainly depend, to a great extent, on our human bodily organization. At the same time, however, the activity of thinking plays a part in these experiences. And the more it does so, the more our sensory perception and willing become independent of the body. Visionary experiences and mediumistic demonstrations, on the other hand, depend completely on the body. In such practices, everything is eliminated from soul life that could make perception and willing independent of the body. As a result, the contents and products of the soul become nothing more than manifestations of the physical life of the body. Visionary experiences and mediumistic phenomena, in fact, result from the fact that in them a person is more dependent on the body than in ordinary perception and willing. True supersensible experience, on the other hand, such as described in this book, requires that we direct our development in the opposite direction from that of visionary and mediumistic experience. In other words, we strive to make the soul progressively less dependent on the body, more independent of it, than it is in ordinary perceiving and willing. Thereby we achieve the degree of independence from the body that is characteristic of pure thinking, thus extending the range of our soul activities. To develop supersensible soul activities, as intended here, it is most important that we penetrate the experience of pure thinking clearly and consciously. Indeed, this experience of pure thinking is already and fundamentally a supersensible activity of the soul, although it is one in which we do not yet perceive anything supersensible. In pure thinking, we are already living in the supersensible realm, but at this point it is still only pure thinking, and not yet anything else that we experience in a supersensible way. Further supersensible experiences must then be a continuation of the soul experience we have achieved in union with pure thinking. Therefore, it is crucial that we experience this union correctly, for right understanding of this union sheds the light of insight on the nature of supersensible knowledge. On the other hand, as soon as our soul life sinks below the clarity of the consciousness experienced in thinking, we stray from the right path to true cognition of supersensible worlds. Instead, our soul is taken over by our bodily functions, and what it conveys to us will be a revelation, not of the supersensible, but merely of events occurring in our body in the realm below the sense perceptible. As soon as our soul experiences enter the realm of the supersensible, they are no longer as easy to describe in ordinary language as experiences in the material world. Therefore, when reading or hearing descriptions of the supersensible world, we must be mindful that the language employed is in a way further removed from the actual facts than is the case when we talk about physical experiences. We have to understand that many expressions and terms employed in these descriptions are, as it were, only images delicately hinting at what they refer to. It was stated in the first chapter that, quote, originally all rules and teachings of spiritual science were presented in a symbolic sign language, close quote. And the third chapter likewise spoke of a certain, quote, system of writing or occult script, close quote. From this it may appear that such a language or script may be learned in the same way as we learn the letters and combinations of an ordinary language in the physical world. Certainly it is true that there have always been and still are schools and associations of spiritual science possessing the symbolic signs by which supersensible facts may be expressed. A person initiated into the significance of these signs, therefore, possesses a means of directing his or her soul experiences to the supersensible realities in question. What is much more important, however, is that in the course of such experiences, as a soul can attain through realizing the contents of this book, for instance, the soul should find this script revealed through its own contemplative experiences of the supersensible. The supersensible realm speaks to the soul, which must then translate what it has heard into symbolic signs in order to survey it in full consciousness. What is communicated in this script can be realized by every soul. In the course of this realization, a process the soul controls, as we have indicated, the results described in this book become evident. Readers should approach this book as though they were having a conversation with the author. Therefore, the advice about receiving personal instruction on the path to higher knowledge should be understood to refer to this book. In the past, there were good reasons for restricting personal instruction to oral teaching. Now, however, we have reached a stage of human development when spiritual, scientific teaching and knowledge must be spread abroad, much more widely than ever before. Its teachings must become much more accessible than they were in the past. For this reason, the book must take the place of oral instruction. The belief that we need personal instruction, in addition to what is said in this book, is true only to a limited extent. Some of us may indeed need some additional personal help, and such further instruction may be helpful and meaningful to the individuals concerned. But it would be wrong to think that anything of importance has been left out of this book. Everything may be found in this book, if only we read it properly and above all completely. Some of the descriptions in this book may seem to call for a complete transformation of our whole being. However, read rightly, these descriptions do no more than indicate the state of soul necessary for these moments in our lives when we encounter the supersensible world. For such moments, we develop this state as a kind of second being within us, while our other healthy self continues on its normal course. We learn to keep the two beings apart and to regulate their interaction properly. All this we do in full consciousness. Thus we do not become useless and incompetent in practical life. We do not lose our interest and skillfulness for life because we are, quote, practicing spiritual research all day, close quote. Nevertheless, the experiences we have in the supersensible world will radiate throughout our whole being. Rather than alienating us from life, they will make us more productive and effective. The descriptions in this book had to be presented as they were, because each process of cognition directed toward the supersensible world takes our whole being. Every moment that we are given over to cognition of supersensible realities engages us totally. Perceiving a color, for example, requires only the participation of our eyes and the related nerves, but our whole being participates in the perception of supersensible things. Our whole being becomes, in a sense, quote, all ears or all eyes, close quote. This is the reason why information on how to develop supersensible cognition often seems to imply a complete transformation of our being, as though our ordinary being were wrong and must become different. I would like to add a few points to what was said in Chapter 6 concerning the effects of initiation. With slight modifications, this holds good also for other sections. Some readers may wonder why supersensible experiences are described in pictures and images rather than abstractly as ideas. The reason is that to experience supersensible reality, it is important that we know ourselves as supersensible beings in a supersensible world. We become aware of the reality of our own supersensible nature in the descriptions of the, in quotes, lotus flowers and the, in quotes, ether body. To enter the supersensible realm without such an awareness of our own supersensible nature would be like being aware of the events and processes of the physical world that surrounds us, but not of our own bodies. Just as we become conscious of ourselves in the physical world through the perception of our physical body, our own supersensible form, which we can perceive in our ether body and our soul body, makes us conscious of ourselves in the supersensible realm. The end of the epilogue and the end of the book, the Bamford translation of the book by Rudolf Steiner, How to Know Higher Worlds, A Modern Path of Initiation.